I do like that they're still deliberating about the army thing, because obviously that's a big deal that they should think about, but that's not really the focus of this arc. That's why I distinguished this arc from the previous episode. The previous episode was, oh my god, the enemy made the army. And then we have 3 episodes about, well, basically Yoda getting in position for the original trilogy. It is nice to have Liam Neeson back, by the way. I mean, it sounded a lot like him, but I went ahead and verified just in case, and it is actually Liam Neeson. It was nice of him to come back and play Qui-Gon again. It's actually funny to me how distracting Yoda being distracted is for other people. It brings to mind an idea. A lot of people tend to have absolutes in their lives. Now, they're not literally absolutes, of course, but rather things that they hold as baselines. I've talked about this concept many times before in my show in many different aspects. The idea of a baseline is this is what you use to determine all other things. Logically speaking, in order to have logical deduction, you must have a baseline. Because if there's no baseline, there's nothing to deduce from. All you have is nebulous things, which cannot be concreted as facts. Make sense? I mention this because it's very clear the Jedi Order holds Yoda as a baseline, and thus the closest thing to an absolute the Jedi Order has. And he's all distracted and worried, and they're just like, I have mentioned many mud-flinging comments regarding the Jedi Order for the last, God, 20 years now, something like that. It's been a while. But I will always give them credit for their loyalty to Yoda. Except in this episode, of course. No, I'm kidding. Because they all are like, okay, we will all meditate to learn what happens. They all learn nothing. But then Yoda, actually Anakin, heard. I thought that was interesting. I wonder if that's just because of Anakin's nature or because of his connection to Qui-Gon. But I would think it's his nature because you'd think Obi-Wan would have heard too, right? Anyways, I do like how they posit the idea that someone can't stay alive after dying as a Jedi. The reason being that's philosophically against what a Jedi is and does. A Jedi and the light side and the Order is all about acceptance, about peace, tranquility, and letting things flow the way they flow. That's admittedly somewhat my interpretation, because even to this day the Force is still a little bit interpretable, but you get the point. By contrast, a Sith is the exact opposite. It's all about the self. It's all about you, and you doing what it is you want to. You forcing change or forcing alteration, ambition, passion, aggression, trying to alter the circumstances. Thus, a Jedi would dissipate into the Force, become one with the Force. A Sith would force themselves to endure, and thus we have the very concept of Sith ghosts. Although, funnily enough, in the actual movies, we don't see any Sith ghosts, do we? Even though they're prolific in the EU. I don't know if they're in the AU at all. By contrast, we see 4 Sith Jedi ghosts, if I'm not mistaken, across the series. Anyways. The other thing I like here is that Ki-Adi-Mundi's entire statement about Yoda makes perfect sense. He's the one who keeps championing the idea that Yoda is being used as a vulnerability point by the enemy. Now, spoilers for like 2 episodes from now, he is right. That is something that they will inevitably try to do. He just happens to be wrong in this exact instance. But once again, we see that the system is wrong. Have you noticed that? We've seen the system being wrong with regards to the government. We saw this many times in Season 5. Like, all of Season 5 was about that, practically. Then in Season 6, we see the system being wrong with regards to the judicial system, the courts and the analysis, the investigation, there we go, the investigation side of things with Ahsoka. Then we saw the system being wrong with regards to Obi-Wan and his desire to take care of the situation. That's the Jedi Council. And I'm missing one. There was another one. I thought I jotted it down. Looks like, oh, yes, the military with 5s. That was the other case of the system being wrong, and 5s having to break out the system. Here we have what is basically the final system that is wrong. The Jedi Council, the Jedi Order itself. The fact that the Order is wrong, just like every other broken system in this setting, especially at this point in time. So Yoda has to literally break out. I absolutely love the fact that he goes to Anakin for this. And Anakin doesn't even try to deny it. He's like, hey, it wasn't my idea. Yoda asked me to get him out. Shrug. And yet, there's something strangely heartwarming about that. I've said this so many times before, but I really feel like if more people in the council had actually embraced Anakin as a friend, and actually treated him like a person, and the complexity and nuance that involves, I think Anakin Skywalker would have turned out a lot differently, personally. I know there's a lot of argument and debate about that, and that's valid, because it's a very interpretable situation. I just wish we had seen more of this, because Yoda approaches Anakin in this episode not as a master, not as someone passing on teachings. He doesn't recite dogma. He just says, I need your friend. I need your help. You know, need your help, do I? Know how to be spontaneous, are you? You know, he even says it in a wonderfully complimentary manner. Anyways, so looking at my notes here, the deprivation chamber as a means of meditation is an interesting idea, although you'll do notice Yoda doesn't actually tell them anything. And then, of course, R2-D2 takes Yoda to Dagobah. Shrug. What I like about this is we have two explanations across canon for why he went, three, actually, for why he went to Dagobah. The two I'm concerned with are, it's a world that has tons and tons of life, which will mask his existence, and it's a world that is a nexus of the Force, and thus a very pure Force planet. And, of course, these two things are not mutually exclusive, it's worth noting, so both of these could be true. Anyways, so then we find out about the living force, which can become part of the cosmic force, which is then expressed to us through midi-chlorians, because you had to ruin it, didn't you? I'm kidding. I don't actually have as much hate for midi-chlorians as some people do. I just think they were unnecessary. That's always been my stance on that. There was really no purpose in that. But I don't want to get into that argument again, so all I'm going to say is this entire argument about the living force and the cosmic force sounds a whole lot like the life stream to me. Now, I know that a lot of these ideas about the Force, especially when the mythos is really being concreted around the creation of the second and third movies, buys into, I can't remember the name of it, but, you know, the reincarnation concept. The idea that everything just kind of goes and ebbs and flows and cycles, right? So I get that that's a deliberate inference. Lord knows the life stream concept itself basically comes from the same general concept. But what I'm hearing here is local life force, cosmic life force, local life force, life. And that's the pattern going out and in. Kind of an interesting idea in its own right. I don't buy it personally. I mean, I'm not into that in general, and I don't know. I feel that almost takes a little bit away from the construction of the Force and the nature of its existence within the setting. But then again, that's also keeping in mind that from this perspective, the very existence of the dark side is wrong, that it shouldn't exist at all. And, well, I don't agree with that either, so. But I mention that because this whole life cycle thing does not have a place for the dark side, if you're thinking about it. Again, that goes back to George's idea about how the Force in balance would mean an absence of darkness. So, I get it. I do. It's the idea that it's a poisonous influence that needs to be removed entirely. It's just, I don't like that personally. I think there's other ways they can do that. Anyways, there is one thing that's interesting, though. The implication of these episodes is that what is about to happen with the conclusion of the Clone Wars and the creation of the Galactic Empire and the Galactic Civil War and the years of devastation that will follow is the will of the Force. No, not the wills, the will of the Force. There's an idea that's been mentioned very recently to now when I record this, and that idea is the idea that the will of the Force is not necessarily a good thing. It's usually portrayed as if it is, because everyone must follow the will of the Force. But in this, it was the idea that the will of the Force was basically wrong and needed to be challenged, and that's what leads to actual balance and things actually working out. I'm skipping over details because this is a mini-nation, not a full rumination, but I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about. And I find that idea interesting given what's being presented here. The idea that the Force wants all of this garbage to happen. Food for thought. And then, of course, Yoda sees bits of Episode 3. And, of course, Sidious, join me. There is no other way. To be continued.